Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to reflect on how the Tory culture wars are harming, not helping their cause. And there was a time when they understood this. So the Tories and their client media have recently been making enemies out of pretty much everyone, but the nastiest culture wars are those against people who actually need support. The recent behaviour of the Conservatives is incredibly damaging for society, but it is also damaging for them politically. And there was a time when they knew this. And I was reminded of this with the latest embarrassing behaviour from the Tories' so-called common sense minister, Esther McVey. Never was there a more ill-fitting ministerial title since Mad Nads was made Secretary of State for Culture. McVey has decided to pursue her party's culture wars by saying that civil servants should not be allowed to wear rainbow lanyards. Apparently, rainbow lanyards are not common sense. Socrates said so, according to McVey. But then there seemed to be a bit of a climb down yesterday. Seems that she'd been shooting her mouth off without bothering to consult her cabinet colleagues. When asked about this, Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, said he had no objections to rainbow lanyards. Downing Street said, yeah, we're not going to be enforcing this latest piece of common sense. McVey is once again looking like a right prat. But what she was doing was trying to align herself with the Conservative Party's assault on vulnerable minorities. She just did it in a very stupid way. But there was a time when the Conservatives did not want to be seen as attacking people this openly. Go back nearly 8 years. Boris Johnson's just been made Foreign Secretary. One of the first things he did was to say that UK embassies could fly the rainbow flag for Pride events. Now, let's be honest, Boris Johnson may not hold any personal antipathy towards particular groups of people, but he doesn't care about them either. This move was not because he was a great ally of those who feel vulnerable in society. This wasn't a great, oh, Boris Johnson's Foreign Secretary is a brilliant ally for us. Yay, Boris. It's because he knew it would be popular. It was a political move. It was at a time when the Conservative Party was still led mostly by people who either had a good idea of what was popular or at the very least took advice from those who did, which includes Boris Johnson himself. It's only since winning the election in 2019 that Johnson seemed to ignore efforts to chime with the public. You know, he started to believe his own hype that he was a miracle worker, so he could do exactly what he's like. But before that win, he actually listened to good political advice, which is how he was able to build up a public persona. But he wasn't the only one to understand that appearing to be inclusive was politically beneficial, astute even. When David Cameron became leader of the Conservative Party in 2005, he knew that his task was to detoxify the image of his party. They leaned into liberal policies, which were genuinely held by some in the party and merely accepted as the price for electoral success by others. You know, there's no surprise that so many Conservative MPs at the moment are very unhappy with their party, and some at least have already defected. It's because there was a time when they believed the party was more liberal than it really was. You know, like Boris Johnson, I don't consider David Cameron to be particularly committed to liberal policies on a personal level. His policies in government were certainly not compassionate. Yet he claimed to be a compassionate Conservative. His big society policy was essentially designed to link with austerity and create slave labour. Oh, you don't have a job? Oh, sure, of course you can have unemployment benefits, but you'll have to do some work for them. It's so you can get work experience. That'd be really useful for you finding a job, you know, which all sounds fine. Until you realise that if local businesses can take workers on who are unemployed, then they don't need as many actual employees because these workers don't need paying and they won't have employment rights either. So this policy, had it taken off, would have meant a vast reduction in the number of relatively unskilled jobs available because the businesses would just take on people from the job centre. And people would be working for much less than minimum wage and would still be classed as being unemployed. A proper slave economy. But because Cameron understood public sentiment, he pushed the compassionate conservatism message. It was a lie, but he understood the need for the lie. Even before Cameron. Theresa May coined the term the nasty party. It might surprise you. You might think the term the nasty party used about the Conservatives came from the other side. No, Theresa May used the term herself to describe how the Conservatives were seen back in like 2002 or something. She was arguing several years before Cameron took over that the Conservative Party needed to be seen as compassionate. Yet as Home Secretary, she was responsible for the hostile environment and the Windrush scandal. Another Tory who was clearly not compassionate herself, but understood that the public are, and that her party needed to be seen as such in order to win elections. 3 former Conservative Prime Ministers, all of whom knew what image the Conservative Party needed to project in order to win elections, all of whom have demonstrated that they understood that the nasty party, as May described them, is not appealing to the public. So why have the current leaders of the party not cottoned onto this? Have they never studied the lessons of their own success? It would seem not, because how else to explain how they've come full circle? And sure, you could argue that maybe the Conservatives have moved the Overton window enough to get away with some of the rhetoric they're using. Indeed, it's clear this has actually happened. But if the Tories can shift the Overton window, which is, for those who don't know, it's sort of like, imagine all the sort of things you can say and policies you can implement that would meet with enough public approval for you to win elections. It moves around. If the Tories can shift that window to less inclusive views, becoming more mainstream, then we can expect Labour to shift it back over time as well. Indeed, that will be one of the most important tasks awaiting them in government. Nudging our society back towards societal cohesion instead of division. It's always in Labour's strategic interest to do that, regardless of what you may think of the individuals in charge. And it's remarkable to think that what helped propel the Conservatives back to power last time was a very deliberate push towards making the party seem compassionate. Despite the main leaders clearly being anything but themselves, utterly ridiculous to suggest that Theresa May, David Cameron or Boris Johnson have a compassionate bone in their body. But they all understood the need to appear so. And the modern Tory leaders are simply not reflecting on this. Their tilt towards culture wars came about as a result of falling behind in the polls. Their policies have always been nasty, but it was in the last few years that they just dropped the act. Priti Patel using the term do-gooders as a term of offence. Latest government saying that amputees are just making it up, shouldn't be getting disability benefits. You're disabled, what's wrong with you? You've got no arms. That'd be ridiculous. You know, the mask is off now, which is mad because they donned the mask in order to win power. It was always a mask, but they used to recognise the need for it. I mean, ordinarily, I might suppose that the Tories have just become too complacent, like they did last time. They'll get walloped in the election, and probably again afterwards, just like Theresa May in 2002. Someone will pop their head up and point out that the Conservative Party are seen as barbarous ogres, the nasty party, and that they need to clean up their acts. They may be ignored again. They'll lose another election, but then they'll realise that their image is not appealing. They'll dust off the mask and put it back on. But with concerted moves to fundamentally change the Conservative Party afoot, I'm not sure if that is actually going to be the case. They've already shoved quite a lot of their former intelligence out of the airlock. What they'll have in place now are simply those whose views are very extreme, but also lacking in any political understanding. They're basically thick, politically speaking, they're thick. It may be that there simply isn't a large enough mass of intelligence in the Tories to even steer them back. That they're not simply being quiet, perhaps they simply no longer exist. But the situation right now is as follows. The Tories suffered crushing losses in both 1997 and 2001. Didn't really get much better in 2001. Some then started to recognise they had an image problem. They were seen as nasty. Another crushing defeat in 2005, and they finally decided to get serious and created this concept of compassionate Conservatives. It was an illusion, but they recognised the need for it. It worked. They won power. They've now dispelled their own illusion. They've smashed their own rainbows and are once again heading for another crushing defeat. That's the situation, and I wonder how many Tory MPs even realise it. Maybe the majority simply don't even know the recent history of their own party. After all, very few of them were MPs at the time, and it's possible most weren't really paying close attention to politics beforehand. So they are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.